What is true power? And why is it that those who parade themselves as powerful, those who cling to crowns, titles, or positions, seem to never actually hold it? This is the paradox worth looking into, because the moment you raise the question, the illusion of what most people call power begins to tremble. We live in a world where power is usually measured in numbers in a bank account, armies that march behind a flag, followers that bow to a name. Yet all of these, as imposing as they may seem, are fragile. They can be taken away, stripped overnight, dissolved by chance, history, or death. The one who defines their power through these externals is like a man building his fortress out of sand. The tide of time inevitably washes it away, but there exists another kind of power, so subtle that it does not shout, so silent that most overlook it. This is the power that does not depend on applause, fear, or recognition. It is not displayed, and yet when you encounter it in someone, you feel it. It's the presence that stills a room without uttering a word, the strength that is unshaken even in loss, the command that arises not from domination, but from inner clarity. This is why those who appear the strongest are often the most insecure. They are busy proving, defending, projecting. They wear the mask of control, but beneath it lies the anxiety of losing what they think grants them power. The awakened do not need such masks, for they have discovered that real power was never about controlling others, but about no longer being controlled by fear, craving, or illusion. And so, the question of true power unsettles us, because it asks us to see beyond the glitter of status and into the unshakable essence that only silence can reveal. Most people assume that power is synonymous with force, with the ability to bend others to one's will, to manipulate circumstances, or to dominate through fear and authority. We see it in politics, in corporations, even in relationships, this endless theater of pushing and pulling, of trying to stand taller by pressing someone else lower. But if you look closely, this is not power itself. It is merely the performance of power. It is like staring at a menu and mistaking the words for the meal. You can describe authority, influence, or strength 1,000 different ways, but none of that equals the actual experience of power. What people call power is often just the idea of it dressed in symbols: medals, crowns, bank accounts, followers. The concept is mistaken for the essence. The awakened see through this confusion. They realize that when you chase symbols, you become their prisoner. The politician obsessed with votes, the executive terrified of losing status, the manipulator who must constantly calculate. None of these figures are free, and therefore none of them are powerful. They are trapped in the fragile architecture of appearances. Real power is not exercised against others, it is discovered within. It is the unshakable clarity that remains when the illusions of control fall apart. It is presence that does not depend on recognition. When you mistake the concept for the thing, you end up with shadows. But when you look directly without the interference of ego and social conditioning, you see that power is not force, not domination, but freedom. The difference between living by the idea of power and tasting its reality is the difference between endlessly reading about food and actually eating. It changes everything. Imagine someone standing in front of a mirror, wearing a crown made of tin, dressed in robes stitched together from cheap fabric, parading as though they were royalty. From a distance, the image may fool the eyes, but up close it is nothing but costume. This is how most people live in relation to power. They confuse the decoration with the essence. They see the crown's shadow on the wall and believe it is sovereignty itself. Yet a shadow has no weight, no substance, no life. You can chase it forever and still never grasp it. Power as the world commonly understands it, status, wealth, dominance, is just such a shadow. It is convincing enough to inspire obedience or envy, but inside, the one who clings to it knows the hollowness. True power is not in the crown, but in the presence of the one who wears it, or even in the presence of the one who does not need to. A crown placed on an insecure head only amplifies the insecurity, but the person who has dissolved the illusion of self-importance radiates something that no costume can produce. Their very being commands attention, not because they demand it, but because it is natural. This is the difference between a play actor king and a mountain. The king must constantly perform his role to be believed. The mountain does nothing, and yet exerts an undeniable gravity. Real power is like that. It does not beg to be seen. It does not need symbols to be validated. It simply is. And once you perceive the contrast, the parade of empty crowns appears almost tragic, a theater of shadows when the living essence of power has always been closer than breath. Most people live in a kind of trance, a collective hypnosis woven out of politics, social roles, and the endless theater of appearances. They walk through life convinced that power is prestige, applause, or the ability to command obedience. Entire societies reinforce this dream. Children are taught to admire the celebrity, the politician, the billionaire, as if these figures embody strength. But what is really happening is a fixation on symbols, not on substance. The applause fades as quickly as it rises. Prestige is borrowed from the gaze of others, and authority collapses the moment recognition is withdrawn. It is like staring at endless portraits of power without ever touching the living presence of it. People are chasing reflections in a hall of mirrors, each image convincing, yet none of them real. In this trance, individuals exhaust themselves in constant performance. They craft reputations, polish identities, fight for positions, all in the hope of being validated by others. But the irony is brutal. The more dependent you are on being seen as powerful, the less power you truly have. You are at the mercy of the crowd, enslaved by their approval, which means you are never free, and freedom is the essence of real power. The awakened recognize this for what it is, a collective sleepwalk, a world of men and women mistaking applause for strength, mistaking recognition for reality. To live like this is to survive only on the images of power, to endlessly consume shadows without ever tasting the substance. It is hunger disguised as satisfaction, a trance so deep that most never question it. And yet, once seen, the illusion unravels instantly, and what was once admired reveals itself as empty ritual. Everyone, at some point in their lives, has brushed against a deeper current of power, a silent power that does not depend on rank, wealth, or recognition. Think of the calm that settles over you just before making the right decision, the kind of decision that feels as though it arises from somewhere deeper than thought. In that moment, you are not wrestling with doubts or chasing approval. There is a quiet certainty, a clarity that carries its own authority. This is not the noise of control, but the presence of true power, and it requires no audience to confirm it. Or recall the times you've been in the company of someone who said very little, perhaps nothing at all, and yet their presence filled the room. Others leaned in, instinctively attentive, as though gravity itself had shifted. No shouting, no displays, no need for attention, and yet everyone felt it. This is the mark of power unbound from ego. It does not need to announce itself, because its reality is undeniable. And think of those moments when fear suddenly falls away. Not because circumstances changed, but because you were no longer chained to the stories your mind was telling. In that clarity, everything seems sharp, immediate, alive. You feel rooted, untouchable, not because you conquered something external, but because you are no longer captive to your own illusions. That freedom is itself power, and it is available to anyone who dares to see beyond the trance. These experiences are not exotic. They belong to ordinary life. They are flashes of what the awakened live in more continuously, a silent strength that is not given or taken by the world, but discovered within. And once recognized, it becomes clear that this power is not reserved for the few, but is woven into the very fabric of being, waiting for us to notice. From the earliest moments of childhood, we are trained, almost unconsciously, to equate power with recognition, titles, and control over others. A child is praised for being the leader of the group, rewarded when they outperform their peers, admired when they stand in front of the class. Slowly, the seed is planted. To be noticed is to be powerful, to be followed is to be valuable. As we grow, this message only deepens. Schools glorify ranks and grades, societies celebrate wealth and possessions, and media saturates us with images of celebrities and politicians as though they are the pinnacle of influence. Power becomes something external, something to be achieved and displayed, a performance that exists only in the eyes of others. The problem is that this conditioning blinds us. We learn to chase status the way someone chases a mirage in the desert, always running toward an image that disappears the moment we get close. The businessman builds his empire only to discover his sense of worth still depends on constant growth. The politician secures authority, but spends every waking hour terrified of losing it. The family member who dominates others' mistakes fear for respect, never realizing that the control they wield is actually a sign of weakness. In every case, the external form of power reveals itself to be unstable, fragile, and deeply exhausting. This social conditioning pulls us away from real power. Instead of discovering strength within, strength that cannot be stripped away by applause or rejection, we are taught to seek it outside, where it never truly resides. The awakened see this clearly. The equation status, questa power, is false. Status is borrowed, temporary, conditional. True power is silent, independent, and untouchable by circumstance. Yet as long as society conditions us to seek it in titles, conquests, and obedience, we remain prisoners of illusion, mistaking symbols for substance and shadows for the reality that has always been here. The moment of awakening is not marked by fireworks or some dramatic conquest. It is marked by the quiet breaking of a spell. The one who awakens suddenly sees that all the effort poured into controlling others, into bending circumstances, into defending an image of authority was never real power at all. It was theater, and like all theater, it depended on an audience. True power is discovered the moment you no longer need the performance, because you no longer need to be defined by it. The awakened one realizes that power does not lie in conquering the world outside, but in dissolving the chains within. Chains of fear, craving, pride, and illusion. When this trance breaks, a reversal happens. What once seemed strong, manipulation, control, dominance, now looks fragile, almost pitiful. And what once seemed invisible, silence, presence, freedom, now reveals itself as unshakable strength. To not be ruled by the compulsions of ego is the greatest form of sovereignty. No one can take away your presence in this moment. No loss can remove the clarity of awareness itself. No rejection can touch the ground of being that does not rely on applause. This is why the awakened are not easily shaken. They may walk through defeat, humiliation, or even death, yet something in them remains untouched, immovable, serene. This is the essence of true power, not the ability to dominate, but the ability to remain free no matter what. When illusions fall away, you see that freedom itself is power, the power to live without masks, to act without fear, to speak without the need to manipulate, to rest without the need to prove. The awakened one does not escape the world, but no longer lives enslaved by its mirages. They do not reject power, they embody it in its purest form. Freedom from illusion. The ego is built on division. It whispers that you are here and the world is out there, that you are one entity struggling for survival against countless others. From this illusion, the entire concept of power as domination is born. If you are separate, then safety and strength come from controlling what lies beyond you, other people, circumstances, even nature itself. The ego feeds on this narrative, conquer or be conquered. And so the pursuit of power becomes a game of endless competition, of trying to assert yourself against the imagined other. But what the awakened see is that this other is not other at all. The wall between self and world is an invention, a convenience of language, not a fact of reality. When you breathe, the air outside becomes the body inside. When you eat, what was world is transformed into you. Every heartbeat, every thought, every gesture is inseparable from the larger field of existence. To manipulate another is in truth to manipulate yourself, for you and they are woven into the same web. The awakened recognize this, and the entire game of domination collapses. The need to overpower others reveals itself as ignorance, the flailing of an ego that cannot see its own reflection in everything it touches. Real power, then, is not in conquest, but in self-mastery. Not in bending the will of others, but in seeing clearly through the illusions of separation that create the craving to dominate. The one who sees unity realizes that every attempt to enslave others tightens their own chains, while every act of liberation deepens their own freedom. Domination of the external is fragile and fleeting, but mastery of the internal, freedom from fear, greed, and illusion, is unshakable. To rule yourself is the only rule that matters, because once the illusion of separation dissolves, there are no others left to conquer. There is only the whole, and to be aligned with it is the highest form of power. The awakened understand that power is not a struggle of me against the world, but the realization that there was never such a division to begin with. Power is not found in resistance, in endlessly pushing against life, but in recognizing oneself as part of the very current that shapes existence. What most call strength, forcing outcomes, fighting constantly to impose will, turns out to be fragility disguised as power. It consumes energy, breeds anxiety, and inevitably collapses when circumstances shift. To fight against the current of reality is to exhaust yourself until you drown. To flow with it is to discover a silent, effortless strength that needs no defense. Consider the example of water. To the untrained eye, water looks weak, yielding, vulnerable. Yet over centuries it wears down the hardest stone, carves valleys, reshapes landscapes, moves mountains without ever needing to fight. Its secret lies in its willingness to flow, to adapt, to take the shape of whatever it meets. It does not resist, and therefore it cannot be broken. The awakened see their own life in this way. Instead of clinging to rigid forms of control, they align with the movement of reality itself. They do not impose force. They embody it just as water embodies inevitability. This is the essence of silent power. It is not loud, not theatrical, not demanding recognition. It is the strength that comes from harmony, from being in tune with the larger process that includes self, others, and nature as one. In this recognition, the illusion of opposition dissolves. There is no battle to win, only a dance to join. The awakened move with this rhythm, and their power is undeniable, not because they force, but because they cannot be opposed. They have become like water, seemingly gentle but unstoppable. When the trance of ego fades, what becomes visible is the extraordinary intelligence already operating in life itself. The heart beats without command, the lungs draw breath without instruction, the earth spins without a single human hand turning it. Grass pushes through concrete, rivers carve their paths, stars explode into galaxies, and all of it unfolds without needing anyone to manage it. The ego, in its blindness, insists it is the orchestrator of events, the grand controller directing every detail. But the awakened see that the ego is not in charge. It is being carried by the same intelligence that grows trees, heals wounds, and turns caterpillars into butterflies. Real power is not found in resisting this flow, but in aligning with it, trusting it, and acting through it. This is why the presence of a truly awakened leader feels so different from that of one still bound by ego. The ego-driven leader is rigid, controlling, constantly forcing outcomes, constantly afraid of losing grip. The awakened leader acts like nature itself, spontaneous, adaptive, efficient, and in a sense inevitable. Their actions feel as though they arise from the moment, not from fear or calculation. They do not waste energy pretending to be the author of life. They move as life itself, and because of this their power carries a strange quality: effortless authority, influence without manipulation, direction without coercion. To align with the intelligence of the universe is to realize that the same force that beats your heart is the force that sustains all existence. To resist it is exhaustion, to fight it is futility, but to live in harmony with it is to discover a current that carries you with unimaginable strength. This is awakened power, not ego's control, but life's inevitability. The ego is forever bargaining with time. It whispers that real power will come later, when you achieve more, when you rise higher, when others finally recognize you. It dangles promises. When I have this position, when I reach that goal, when I conquer that person or circumstance, then I will be powerful. Life under this illusion becomes a waiting game, an endless deferral. Power is always tomorrow, never today. The ego thrives on this horizon, keeping you restless, always chasing an image of yourself that doesn't exist yet. But the awakened see through this trick. They realize that tomorrow is only a thought arising now, just as yesterday is only a memory surfacing in the present. The only place where life happens, the only ground where power can exist, is here, this breath, this moment. True power is immediate, not projected. It does not need accumulation, conditions, or delay. When you are fully present, unburdened by the mind's stories of before and after, there is a strength that arises naturally. Decisions are clearer, actions more precise, presence undeniable. Compare this to the constant anxiety of the ego, which is always split, part of it trapped in regret of the past, part of it trapped in anticipation of the future. That division is weakness. The awakened live undivided, rooted in now, and therefore their power is whole. They do not wait to be powerful later. They embody it here. This shift is radical, to discover that the only time you can ever be free, the only time you can ever act, the only time you can ever know power, is now. The future is an illusion, the past is a ghost, and the ego that clings to both has no ground. Presence is the ground, and in that ground, the awakened discover a power untouchable by time. When someone awakens to this deeper understanding of power, their entire way of living shifts. Fear, which once dictated choices and shaped every attempt to control others, begins to lose its grip. There is no longer a desperate need to prove anything, because power is no longer measured by how others respond. The awakened do not chase applause or recognition. They do not tremble at the thought of losing status. Their strength is not built on fragile symbols. It comes from within, steady and unshakable, because it is not dependent on external approval. This does not mean they become passive or indifferent. On the contrary, their actions carry a sharper precision. Without the clutter of ego-driven motives, their energy is not wasted on posturing, manipulation, or defending appearances. When they act directly, cleanly, with clarity. Imagine a swordsman who no longer swings wildly to impress a crowd, but delivers a single, effortless stroke when the moment calls for it. This is how awakened power moves, efficient, economical, and yet decisive. Meanwhile, false power reveals itself as noisy and exhausting. It constantly requires witnesses to keep it alive, like a fire that needs endless fuel. Titles must be maintained, reputations defended, dominance asserted again and again. The truly powerful see this for what it is, weakness disguised as strength. In contrast, real power is self-sufficient. It does not collapse when no one is watching because its foundation is not external at all. In daily life, this translates into a calm authority. The awakened are not pulled into unnecessary battles. They do not waste time convincing or conquering. Their presence alone shifts situations because others sense a steadiness that cannot be manipulated. Without fear to bind them and without vanity to distract them, they are free to act only when necessary, and when they do, their influence is undeniable. This is the practical consequence of awakening, a life lived without masks, without waste, and without fear. Looking back, the thread that runs through all illusions of power is the same, the belief that control over the external world is strength. Armies, wealth, reputation, status, these are treated as trophies of dominance, yet the closer you examine them, the more fragile they appear. They can vanish overnight, they depend on circumstance, and they bind the one who clings to them in chains of fear. False power is always external, always conditional, always dependent on something outside yourself. It is control borrowed, not freedom owned. True power reveals itself in the opposite direction. It is not about bending others, but about not being bent by illusion. It is the freedom that comes when the inner world is no longer ruled by fear, desire, or the constant need for validation. Real strength is not loud. It is quiet, steady, unshakable. It is the presence that does not need to dominate, because it is already whole. The awakened understand that they are not separate fragments fighting against a hostile universe, but expressions of a single movement of life. To recognize this unity is to recognize that there is nothing outside yourself to conquer, and nothing inside yourself that needs defending. This realization also brings time itself into focus. The ego believes power is always in the future, when it conquers, when it wins, when it proves. But the awakened know there is only now, and in this now lies the only ground where life and power truly exist. To live fully in this presence is to discover a freedom that cannot be threatened, because it is not dependent on conditions. In the end, the synthesis is simple. False power is control over others. True power is freedom within yourself. False power separates. True power unites. False power is noise. True power is silence. And once this is seen, the search ends. The awakened one no longer chases shadows of power because they see where it has always been, here, in consciousness itself, in the indivisible unity of life. How you can wear crowns, gather followers, and chase applause, but none of those things will ever be yours in truth. They can be given, and therefore they can be taken. They belong not to you, but to the circumstances that allow them for a time. The only power that cannot be stripped away is the one you discover in this very moment, the power of being awake, here, now. This is the power the truly awakened understand, not as an idea, but as a lived reality. It is not dependent on reputation, on history, or on the approval of others. It is not even dependent on what might happen tomorrow. It is the simple, direct strength of awareness itself, which has been present all along. So do not take these words as philosophy to admire or argue over. Do not place them in the same category as the countless ideas about power you have already heard. Instead, test them where they matter, in your own experience. Right now, stop for a moment and notice. Notice the breath entering and leaving. Notice the awareness in which these words appear. Notice the silence beneath every sound, the stillness beneath every movement. This is presence, and it does not need to prove itself. It does not shout, but its reality is undeniable. Here lies the power that cannot be broken, because it is not borrowed from the world. It is the source from which the world is seen. If you look directly without concepts, you will feel it. The weight of crowns dissolves, the noise of applause fades, and what remains is this vast clarity that no one can grant and no one can take away. That is your inheritance. That is true power. Do not believe me. Do not believe anyone. See it now for yourself.